Well, more than 20 countries are represented in the regional counter-terror talks underway in Sydney. Much of it is closed to the media, but speeches by 3 Australian ministers are open. And our reporter, Melissa Clark, has been working the fringes to find out what tactics and techniques are being shared at the summit.
People from the tech sector, the security industry and representatives from 27 nations are here taking part in the Countering Violent Extremism Summit going on in this building behind me here in Sydney. The Australian government says the threat posed by radical Islamism and the terrorism that comes from it is one that is a global problem and needs to be tackled by everybody. The Attorney-General, George Brandis, wants everyone gathered here today to look at practical ways to try to thwart that terrorism.
The reason for which we have gathered in Sydney today is not to lament, but to take action.
The Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has got some ideas of just how the threat might be tackled, and he's raised the possibility of perhaps increasing Australia's contribution to the military effort in the Middle East.
You can't negotiate with an entity like this. You can only fight it. So what is the Australian government doing? We've sent a strong military force to the Middle East to hit Daesh from the air and to train and assist the Iraqi army to retake their own country. We are talking with our friends and partners about how the airstrikes might be more effective and how the Iraqi forces might be better helped. American leadership is indispensable here, as in all the world's trouble spots.
The Prime Minister's comments follow announcements from the United States that they'll be sending an extra 450 troops to the Middle East to try to halt the spread of Islamic State across Iraq and Syria and regain ground. That brings their contribution to around 3,000. At the moment, Australia has around 800 troops, both in Iraq and in the Middle East, that are involved in training Iraqi troops and helping with airstrikes in Iraq.
The only really effective defence against terrorism is persuading people that it's pointless. We have to convince people that God does not demand death to the infidel. Over time, we have to persuade people that error does have rights. We need everyone to understand that it is never right to kill people just because their beliefs are different from ours. Above all, we need idealistic young people to appreciate that joining this death cult is an utterly misguided and wrong-headed way to express their desire to sacrifice.
A key focus of this summit is social media, both how it's being used by terrorist groups to recruit and spread their message, and also how social media can be used by governments and social and civil leaders to try to counter that message. Also a key element here, the role of women, both as potential recruitees and as victims and as people who might be able to ensure young people aren't brought to the path of radicalisation. The ideas discussed here will be taken to a sideline meeting of leaders at the next UN General Assembly meeting in New York later on this year.
Melissa Clark reporting there from Sydney. Well, Tobias Feakin writes on the rise of well-funded and internet-savvy Islamic extremists for the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. He's a delegate at the summit and he stepped out a few moments ago to talk to us. Well, Tobias Feakin, you've written that ISIL or Daesh distinguishes itself because of its use of social media. There are many social media companies represented at this conference. What do you realistically look to them to bring to the table as operatives within this process?
Firstly, I think it's essential that you have tech companies present at a conference like this. What do they bring? Well, they certainly don't bring the government perspective. What they bring is not only the technical nous, but they also bring the understanding of how to use their platforms and their technology, which means that government, but also, more importantly, community groups and other authorities that are involved in rolling out countering violent extremism work can learn from them in understanding how they can, if you like, make the most of the messages that they have to bring to bear within this area of work.
But it wouldn't be their inclination, would it, to move along the lines of censorship or banning people from joining the platform? That does go contrary to the ethos of a lot of these firms, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we find ourselves in quite a tricky situation right now, post-Snowden, in the way that a lot of the tech firms, a lot of them are based in the US, are now lining themselves up to try and, win back customer bases which are, if you like, sceptical of cooperation with governments. But I think what you find here is with this situation, that there's an understanding that this goes beyond, the Snowden issue. It's way beyond that. This is about actually, what do their customer base want? Do they want to be seeing pictures of beheadings and atrocities being committed? I would say not really, no. But it's not about censorship. Really, this is about bringing tech companies in and asking them questions about how do we most effectively use your platforms? How do we get messages out there? Because if there's one thing from the work that I've done and others have done, you can see how ISIL is very adept at reaching a wide audience and understanding social media marketing, and also how to push buttons of those who are vulnerable and at risk of becoming involved in some kind of extremist activity.
Well, what do you think the answer is as far as counter-radicalisation goes using these platforms?
Sure.
Surely, for credibility reasons, it can't be governments, can it, who are seen to be running those programs?
No, I would agree. I mean, governments aren't inherently going to reach the kind of demographic that they really want to target. And what can governments do in this area? Well, what they can do is put sound information about the realities of what's going on in Iraq and Syria and the realities of what these individuals will travel to, try and dispel that part of the myth. But certainly they're not going to be the best voices, if you like, in the ideological aspect of that. And that's firmly got to sit within the various communities that are being affected by, these issues online. So, governments aren't the mouthpiece of choice, absolutely not, but they do have a role to play in supporting community groups to be able to respond to these issues online.
You've written that there are some estimates of up to 10,000 ISIL-related tweets in a 24-hour period. So they're really pushing against a tidal wave, a large volume of activity, aren't they, in this area? How do they effectively counter it, or can they?
Sure. Well, I mean, the orders of magnitude are beyond what you suggest there. I mean, estimates now are somewhere between 100 to 200,000 social media messages per day on various different platforms. So, it's a tidal wave, and that's done on purpose by ISIL because they want to stretch their net as broadly as possible and affect as many as they can to bring them and recruit them into their ranks. So, government efforts, for instance, the US example of Think Again, Turn Away, it's the sole Twitter account which has, yes, 14,000 followers, but it just can't, react to the swathes of social media activity that ISIL are propagating. So the short answer is with great difficulty when you have, that size of social media campaign ongoing. And that's why you have to provide the tools and equipment, both technologically and also in terms of the skills base, so that others can then take that message online. And we've seen how that's been working around the globe, not so much yet in Australia, but we've seen how that's been working in the UK to a degree and in other countries in Europe in terms of equipping those who are going to be responding with those skills that you require.
And because this is a regional conference, what's your assessment of the activity levels and interest levels of, say, Indonesia and Malaysia in particular at this conference and getting with the region on it?
Sure. Well, I mean, we were yet to see, their contributions through this actual conference, but certainly what we're seeing is a burgeoning issue within these countries of sympathisers with ISIL. There's no doubting they are confronting that issue now. I think everyone has open ears to see how Indonesia and Malaysia are going to ramp up and respond to these issues, because now they've identified that they have issues, and both governments have said, this is an increasingly important issue. If you like, we're open ears to see how they're going to respond. And of course, Indonesia being a close partner, we have a special interest in how Indonesia is going to confront this issue within its own borders. All
right, well, Tobias Feakin, we'll let you get back to the conference, and thanks for your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Well, as the Prime Minister has indicated, Australia is talking to its friends and allies about possible changes to its military role in Iraq. Now, the Defence Minister and some of the military's top brass are in Nowra today. The Navy's celebrating the arrival of new combat helicopters. And our Defence and National Security reporter, Andrew Green, is travelling with them.
Well, this morning, Navy's top brass has gathered at HMAS Albatross here in New South Wales for the commissioning of a new squadron. 725 is going to take charge of these new generation of combat helicopters, the Romeo Seahawks. Australia will be getting eventually 24 of these new choppers at a cost of over $3 billion. Now, the Defence Minister was on hand for today's proceedings and was also asked about the overnight developments in the fight against Islamic State and the US decision to commit additional troops.
Well, we welcome the decision by President Obama to send further defence personnel to Iraq. This is still within the envelope of 3,200, which was initially authorised by the United States. Quite clearly, the events in Anbar province and the fall of Ramadi indicate that some more effort needs to be done.
So while Kevin Andrews doesn't seem quite as candid as the Prime Minister in his remarks this morning, he insists that Australia will continue to monitor the situation very closely, but at this stage, Kevin Andrews is insisting there'll be no more personnel sent to Iraq.
Now, the Trade Union Royal Commission has been delving into the affairs of the Australian Workers' Union, and it's generating some tough questions for Bill Shorten. The union's former State Secretary, Cesar Mellon, is now a Victorian MP and has stood down as Chief Government Whip in that parliament over allegations he brokered secret deals, ripping off members. As the AWU's former National Secretary, Bill Shorten used to be a colleague of Mr Mellon. Today, he faced a barrage of questions about his union past and how a company called Winslow Construction came to pay thousands of dollars worth of union fees.
I have no time for any corruption or illegality in the workplace, be it employer or trade union related. Absolutely zero tolerance. I've spent my whole adult life every day representing people, standing up, improving people's conditions. When I was a union rep, and I make no apology for being a union rep, getting a better deal for our members, and now I've been in Parliament standing up for Australians. That has been the set of values which I'm passionate about and I will keep fighting for.
But does it have a company paying union fees for workers? Isn't that kind of a contradiction in terms, and was that perhaps a better deal for you in that it built your influence rather than for the workers who might have lost out on conditions?
Again, I'm going to refer to my first answer. I've got zero time, zero tolerance for any form of corruption in the workplace, be it employer. I'm going to come to it, but you're making a serious point here, so I'm going to ask that we deal with it seriously. I have zero tolerance for any illegality in the workplace, be it employer or union related. I have spent my adult life improving the conditions of people. The story in today's paper is an unfair smear. Any implication that I'm not completely motivated and committed to getting a better deal for workers, for productive relations at companies, and for standing up for people is completely unfair and false. I can guarantee about any of the matters that we always improved workers' conditions, full stop.
Do you think you should have to appear before the Commission?
That's a matter for the Royal Commission. I've indicated I'm more than happy to cooperate. Doesn't matter who you are in this country, doesn't matter who you are, employer rep, politician, union rep or anyone else. There's zero tolerance for illegality, and it's important that we make sure that people have confidence in the system. Tony Abbott's Royal Commission into trade unions, I always expected there'd be some political smear and unfairness. What I say to Tony Abbott is about what he's saying is let's have a town hall debate, Tony. Let's talk about what you've done for workers in Australia with work choices, and I'll stack it up against what I've done looking after Australia's workers. You know, I say to Tony Abbott, make my day.
And Christopher Pyne, the government's senior cabinet minister, I suppose we could call him, has subsequently come out and demanded that Mr Shorten explicitly answer some questions about his time at the Australian Workers' Union. Now, that's all we have from Capitol Hill for now. Stay with ABC News 24, though. We'll bring you a news update in just a moment.